Good afternoon and welcome to CH4 Plus One News. I'm Danielle.
I'm Nancy, and today we're going to take a look at climate change and how it affects on Venezuela.
Climate change has been a hot topic lately, especially with the Paris COP21 in early December of 2015. COP stands for Conference of Parties, and countries come together here to discuss climate change. For those who may not know, our climate has become increasingly warm due to greenhouse gas emissions such as carbon dioxide and methane. In an effort to address the rising temperatures, the UNFCCC was formed in 1992. Eventually, the Kyoto Protocol was put into effect to curb rising temperatures, but the protocol ended up failing due to tensions between countries, among other reasons. The Paris COP addresses this by encouraging cooperation between countries rather than competition. Overall, the goal is to reduce harmful greenhouse gases globally.
These gases are natural, but industrialization and human activity has contributed a drastic increase in these gases. Driving cars, using electricity, and even the meat industry all contribute to the rising temperature. At the Paris conference, one of the goals for the countries involved is to meet their required emission reduction by the Stockton in 2030.
The increase in temperature can lead to the melting of our polar ice caps and rising sea level, leaving not only Antarctica in turmoil, but also affecting us here in Venezuela. Because of climate change, we are now more vulnerable to coastal storms, diseases, and more. People in Venezuela are feeling the effects firsthand as many low-lying homes are going underwater from this sea rise.
In order to keep our audience well informed, we have brought a few guests to discuss the implication of our changing climate and what we can do about it. Amina, Ashley, and Richard will discuss their specific field with us today. First, we will have Amina, who will focus on the vulnerability and opportunity on climate change regarding Venezuela's environment.
Ashlyn, our other guest, will focus on the involvement and decisions made by Venezuela over time, and Richard will discuss the vulnerabilities of the people. Now over to Amina, who is currently volunteering her time as a climate scientist in Australia.
Hi, my name is Abdul-Kareem. I'm out here in the beautiful city of Sydney, Australia, and I'm researching the carbon sinks in Australia, and I will be focusing on the vulnerabilities and opportunities in the environment of Venezuela.
There are many ecological, political, social, and, of course, economic vulnerabilities and opportunities that Venezuela has to face. Today, I'm just here to talk about a few. So one vulnerability is deforestation. A surprising statistic is that Venezuela has ranked among the top 10 countries with the highest deforestation rates on the planet. Most of the Venezuelan population lives north of the Ronco River, and as a consequence of living here, many of the past deforestation has occurred in this area. Also, there's a large group called the Yanomami tribe, and they mostly live in rainforests and mountains north of the Ronco River. They take up just about 9.2 million acres of land and are considered to be the largest isolated tribe in South America. But recently there's been a lot of cattle ranches in this area, and they have been invading and deforesting their land. So of course this has brought up a lot of social controversy as well as controversy about deforestation and climate change. So now for an opportunity. Volunteering is a great way to help Venezuela's wildlife that has been threatened by deforestation. So many volunteering groups already have been in Venezuela, and they've been working on replanting trees and taking care of forests, which has led to an increase in forests and, of course, a decrease in the deforestation rate. Okay, so due to Venezuela's location, coastal storms is also another vulnerability. So Venezuela is located on the northern coast of South America, so they're right next to the water. So as a consequence of this, they're more susceptible to high winds, which causes clouds, which ultimately results in storms. So people are especially vulnerable who live next to the coast because of these adverse conditions. But there's also an opportunity to live next to the coast, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So because of these coastal storms, many homes have been ruined because of the low-lying lands with the increased intensity of these waters. So although living on the coast does have its downfalls, it also can be super beneficial. So considering grain is a main source of Venezuela's energy, living by the coast is an opportunity for growing crops since there's so much access to water. So Venezuela could potentially benefit from this by growing crops for trade, which would, of course, diversify their economy. This, of course, will help their economy, but it would also reduce the carbon emissions in the air. Also, plants to a certain extent can help climate change. With the sun's energy, plants can capture carbon and convert it into their leaves through photosynthesis. So another great opportunity for Venezuela is their oil source. Venezuela has one of the largest oil reserves in the world, but the oil revenues keep dropping. So Venezuela can start investing in different cleaner energies such as hydro and wind energies, while still, of course, taking advantage of the amount of oil they have, but just saving it for the future. So as we can see here in the slide, in about 200 years, oil will still be one of the most useful resources in the world. So since Venezuela's economy heavily relies on oil, by investing in cleaner energies, they could diversify their economy, but still reducing their oil exports just for now. An important ecological vulnerability is diseases. People who live in warm climates are already vulnerable to diseases. Malaria, for example, is a disease where temperature is particularly crucial. At temperatures below 68 degrees Fahrenheit, Plasmodium falciparum, which causes severe malaria, cannot complete its growth cycle in mosquitoes. So thus it can not be transmitted. So as a result, if global temperatures continue to increase, Venezuelans will be more susceptible to these kinds of diseases. Mudslides are also another huge vulnerability that Venezuela faces. So because of heavy rainfalls, mudslides, which are massive mud that has fallen from a slope or hillside, has left a great amount of the Venezuelan population homeless. So as a result of this natural disaster, Venezuelans have been forced to spend money and time on moving to other places and having less food productivity due to loss of farming fields from mudslides. The desert Los Mandanos de Coro is a great example of natural biodiversity in Venezuela. Not only is this desert a great place for tourism, which of course benefits Venezuela's economy, but it also has carbon dioxide in the ground, which can prevent harmful storms, increase oxygen, producing plants, and many other benefits. Scientists have discovered that humans can live longer if they're exposed to more oxygen and less climate hazards. However, this desert can also be a vulnerability. During storms, the sand is moved, which releases the carbon dioxide that was previously absorbed. This can carry the sand into heavily populated cities and ruin the homes and agricultural land for the people of Venezuela. To conclude, the last country, recently they have been facing shortage of oil revenues, which of course is another crucial vulnerability that has been hurting Venezuela's economy. So as I mentioned before, Venezuela's economy heavily relies on oil. But recently, the oil prices have just fallen to about $33 a barrel, which has been their lowest rate in more than a decade. So as a result of this, Venezuela, who relies on tax revenue from oil production to fund government spending, has been forced to cut public budgets, which have, of course, been stirring up a lot of controversy. The last opportunity we're going to talk about today is tourism. So Venezuela has great natural attractions that could potentially be a major source of revenue. Also, more opportunities for employment would arise, which of course would help Venezuela come closer to diversifying their economy. With a vast amount of beaches, deserts, and forests, Venezuela definitely has potential to further increase their tourism.
Hi, this is Richard. I'm currently in California, and I'm going to give a presentation in a climate change documentary, which will come out in a week. Regards to the Venezuela, I'm going to talk about the vulnerabilities and opportunity of people such as women, older adults, and young people. Before the Industrial Revolution, Venezuelan economy shifted from its traditional agricultural base to petroleum production and export. In 1928, Venezuela was producing 100 million barrels of oil a year. After the Industrial Revolution, Venezuela is currently the fifth largest producer of oil and natural gas in the world. Fossil fuel energy consumption in Venezuela was last measured at 88.85% in 2011, according to the World Bank. As a result, Venezuela is experiencing oil pollution. Total carbon dioxide emission from Venezuela have grown since 1980 and reached total 185 million metric tons of carbon in 2012. The reasons not only include oil exploration, but also the deforestation. Due to the scientific research, Venezuela lost 8.3% of its forest cover, or around 4.3 million hectares of its cover, between 1990 and 2005. Therefore, it is estimated that deforestation contributes about 27 million tons of carbon for 1990 to 2005. Climate change is more serious than we could imagine, and some vulnerable populations are suffer from it, and women is one of them. Higher temperatures can cause there to be rotting of food and make the woman too skinny, potentially lose her job. Also, working in the fields can increase metabolism of women and make her lose more weight as well. With potentially losing her job, she could in turn not to be able to contribute to her family's income or care of their health. Besides women, Wei is a group of indigenous people and they are also vulnerable. Their territory is between Colombian and Venezuelan border. It is located on the coast and the Rio River. The river can potentially flood or become dry out from increasing temperatures, leaving no source of water. With the increasing population of indigenous people, the more demand for food and resources, this could potentially put more people in poverty from unemployment also. Elderly people that are above 50 years old make up 70% of the population in Venezuela. The elderly are unavailable to move as quick for when a scary storm comes along because of decreased means of transportation, and their physical weakness puts them at a disadvantage of providing for themselves, leaving the already vulnerable middle-aged woman in charge of the family's food security. After talking about the vulnerable population, I have 5 recommendations of trade-offs for Venezuela, and here I'm going to talk about some of them. First trade-off is to migrate people from coastal region into the central Venezuelan cities, which could let the people be available to the resources and allow them to have more opportunity to work and be an active member in society. It will also save government spending money to put into things like food storage problems. But the question is, migrating to a different part of the country can bring up social differences and problem adapting to a new location, leaving behind a job and have higher discrimination. The second trade-off is to put more money into climate policy, which can help decrease the vulnerability of the poor poverty-stricken people. But the distribution of money to climate policy can take away from the money needed for health care or money needed to develop the country into the industrialized society. This can cause social unrest between the citizens and the local government. The last trade-off is to switch lighting source of bulbs to LED lights in developed cities, which could consume less watts of energy per year. However, because LED is more expensive than normal bulb, the government has to consider it carefully.
Hi, my name is Ashlyn Kalka, and I'm here in South Carolina celebrating Earth Day. And I'm a climate researcher. I will be focusing on Venezuela's politics from the past to present and their involvement in the UNFCCC, Kyoto, and Conference of Parties.
Venezuela's political platform on climate change has changed over the years. Their views went from positive feelings about Kyoto and early UNFCCC proposals, but over time felt the negative effects of the two action plans going forward. I believe that we as a country do not have bad oil emissions and decreasing export of resources harming our economy. The graph to the right shows this. The government has worked towards fixing them by signing an agreement with the OPEC company to manage a supply of oil that will economically benefit our country. By having more money flowing into the country as a whole, we can put this well towards climate mitigations and adaptations, mechanisms to reduce our carbon footprint, and also lower the prices for citizens to buy the oil and gas for their personal use. So as the death of Hugo Chavez, the country had a decision whether or not to grow the economy more and reduce oil productions. Having an alliance with China already puts us at a dangerous state for trying to reduce the emissions cap in Venezuela. We have put in place carbon-reducing renewable energy resources, but it doesn't compare to the 94% of the country's wealth coming from trading the oil. So as I talk about the contributions, before meeting for the UNFCCC, there was a pre-conference that pretty much said officials in Venezuela got together, which was really smart beforehand, and they discussed what they wanted to talk about at the actual meeting, and they came prepared with 3 modules and objectives. As you can see, Module 1 is inventories of the sources and the sinks of greenhouse gases. Module 2 is mitigation strategies, and Module 3 is overlooking the sea level rise and vulnerability of the forests. Other objectives they had were measuring anthropogenic emissions under the IPCC regulations, identify and analyze better ways to create sinks and reservoirs, and analyze the climate change effects on their forests, which 50% of the territory in our country is Greenland. So as we move forward to the UNFCCC meeting, it pretty much went really well, and after they set a movement forward for individual countries to make individual inventories of greenhouse gas changes and national plans to reduce emissions. These inventories will be presented at the Kyoto Protocol Conference, where they will hear the ideas of each country. Venezuela decided to be a part of this organization in 1992 because of the continued industrialization of the country due to the oil trading and expansion of transportation services affecting the carbon gas in the atmosphere. Because of the decreased forestry and coastal location of citizens, Venezuela signed the Kyoto Protocol. The people getting affected by the weather and climate in Venezuela was rising because of human activities. Venezuela accepted the protocol by seeing a glimpse of diversification among annexed and non-annexed countries. So for this, the Kyoto Protocol pretty much was accepted on February 18, 2005, and it pretty much ratified an agreement that set forth implementation of the Clean Development Mechanism, joint implementation, and international emissions trading. This department that was created by our climate scientist Ana Osorio included Venezuela's National Oil Company, which was created to devise public policies to show corporations from other countries. So going from Kyoto Protocol, we moved to the first pre-conference under the UNFCCC, and it pretty much, they had a COP every year, and the Kyoto Protocol was pretty much failing, and because of this, there was a COP to fix it, and it was the COP19. That Kyoto Protocol was failing because of inequality and non-cooperation and not being able to actually see the reduction of gases because of the market-based outline and annexed countries lying. Through this, the COP worked to fix it through the Copenhagen Accord, which focused on annexed making financial donations and overall lowering the temperature. The next COP, Conference of Parties, that was put into place was a pre-conference. It was pretty much not a pre-conference, but it was like a social meeting that took place to discuss environmental crisis among countries. And the climate negotiator said that the economies are damaging the environment and we need to change the mechanism and not the climate. So going to before the Paris conference, there was a pre-conference, and it came to create the Margarita Declaration, which included the market-based economy that says it needs to be gone. Like they want to get rid of it, and we need to focus more on alliances and working together. So at the Paris conference, it was obvious that past discrimination against non-annexed countries was still there because of the bleeding going on from our client scientist trying to be heard at this discussion. And when she was finally heard, the issues were resolved and the division between non-annexed and annexed countries were canceled, and pretty much everyone came to an agreement that they're going to make their own emission goals decided at this meeting, and each country was going to come back in a couple years for the stock take and show their progress. So pretty much over the years, Venezuela was all for the Kyoto and the market-based mechanism, but seeing the discrimination of the more developed countries, we created social conferences and pre-conferences to prepare to have better alliances and no distinctions, working towards a more nature view than a money view. After Paris, they signed an agreement to reduce emissions 20% by 2030. They have decided to take a step back and let the controlling countries see the consequences for their decisions and allow them to either comply or make their own actions moving forward.
Those recommendations that Richard, Ashley, and Amina mentioned before, we can see that they will have some effects on vulnerable population in Venezuela. Our cleaner oil mechanism will reduce pollution in Venezuela, so the water and the air will be much cleaner in the future. Better environment will lead to less disease spread. Therefore, it will benefit the vulnerable population like women and elderly. On the other hand, COM will create thousands of job opportunities for Venezuela. So vulnerable population will have more job opportunities as well. According to our 8-month meeting and credit information, more short-term goals would more likely help the vulnerable population. Every meeting after 8 months observation could help scientists collect data to make smarter decisions for the future climate. This recommendation ensures Venezuela to achieve the goal that they promised in Paris, which is slow down the speed of climate change. By lowering the temperature, the elderly would not suffer from heat stroke, dehydration, and other disease, the way you will suffer less from less frequent hurricanes and flood as well.
Alright, today we have everyone here with us to offer a few recommendations for Venezuela moving forward in the future regarding some climate change issues. And first we have Ashlyn. So Ashlyn, what are your recommendations for Venezuela?
For Venezuela, I think we should have a cleaner investment from a developed country such as maybe the United States, because they are one of the biggest fossil fuel emitters of greenhouse gases. We have a main export of gas emissions, and as we want to make this cleaner oil mechanism, it will help the carbon dioxide stay in the ground, but also it's still contributing to carbon dioxide. So our goal of meeting our 20% reductions by 2030 might not be there. But if we have this investment from a developed country, we can also help our economy. We can still industrialize, but it's still not, and we're going to focus our trading with the United States, but it's still like we're still getting oil out of the ground, just in a little cleaner way. We believe that this would help not only our country, but the United States, as we are a 0.48% emitter too.
Alright, and are there any negative implications to your recommendation?
Some negative things that might happen, as I said, is we might not be able to meet our 20% emissions reduction because we're still giving off carbon dioxide. It's just not as much. Also, another one would be that previous agreements we've made with developing countries might be dismissed. We might not have trust from countries that are kind of the same economic level as us, which can make very discriminating and biased views at future COP parties.
Thank you. And Richard, so do you have a recommendation for Venezuela?
Yes, I recommend Venezuela to have required meetings to discuss the faster ways to reduce the emissions every 8 months, leading up to 2030 stock take to discuss and create a further goal to focus on adoption and mitigations. And during these meetings, Venezuela needs to discuss the issue of carbon dioxide, how the financial fluctuation against emission reductions and vulnerable locations and populations. At this meeting, the climate scientists will give the correct information to the future leaders to make more smarter decisions.
Okay, great. And are there any downfalls to your ideas?
Yes, we have a negative side. Since Venezuela going to hold the meetings every 8 months, people and such as climate scientists needs to take transportation to attend the meetings, such as cars and planes. And each meeting would consume more food and water. And transportation, food and water will contribute the emissions to the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you. And now over to Mina. Do you have a recommendation for Venezuela?
Yes, I think there should be more accurate credited information. So in 2011, we found out that credited scientists were saying that the temperatures were not rising in the troposphere, and there was only one credible study to back this claim up. So because of this misinformation, there's been clearly a distrust during the COP meetings. Therefore, I have a few recommendations to make sure that the information that they're distributing is accurate. One of them would be they would sign a document that states all climate scientists will distribute accurate information. 2, they will formulate a written report of how it was done and how reliable the measure was. And then 3, if this measure was to be looked at every 8 months, that's only if Venezuela decides to go with Richard's recommendation. So with these measures implemented, we hope that people inside and outside of Venezuela will consider Venezuela to distribute reliable information to the public, which will ultimately decrease discrimination of inaccurate credit studies.
All right. And do you have a downfall to your recommendation?
Yes. So if Venezuela decides to follow this idea, they would have to pay scientists more money, which will, of course, hurt their economy.
All right. Well, that's all for today. And if you guys have any feedback or anything for us, go check out our website. You can leave your comments there. And that's all for today. Thank you for tuning into CH4+1 News.